Hi, this is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alice from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self discovery through a shared love of film. Now, we are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite sides of the globe with very different backgrounds that were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. So, in each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. And really hope that these movies and topics are as fun and revelatory to you as they are to us. So, Karan, why don't you give listeners a sense of what we're talking about today?
Sure. So today's topic is movies that shaped our love of going to the movies, as in to the big screen, to the theater. There's been a lot of conversation around this over the last, I want to say like 5 to 6 years, but the pandemic has obviously accelerated this conversation where people haven't been going to the movie theaters. And so we just felt this was an interesting topic to get into, especially where the divide seems to be growing further and further. Where on one hand, you have Spider-Man No Way Home, which is like beating all box office records. Meanwhile, the rest of the crop is what it is, which is interesting because it's not too long ago where the year that Get Out, Lady Bird all came out, they all made like hundreds of millions of dollars. So it wasn't that long ago, but it's been sort of a steady shift to streaming, and seems like the pandemic has sort of really pushed us further. So that's sort of what we wanted to get into, but also really, in a way, reminisce what watching movies on the big screen mean to us and how they've shaped our journey and such. So when I was thinking about my framework on this topic, it was really about what does watching movies on the big screen mean and what does that invoke for me? And I use that as sort of my framework to think about movies that really fell in that. Curious, Alex, how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, no, it's a lot of the same things. I mean, I think, like you said, this is definitely a topic that is growing in discussion popularity over the years, just as streaming has become so much more powerful and the dynamics of what are in theaters have been changing. I definitely was thinking about, the emotions of what is special to me about the theatrical experience. And then what really kind of helped me frame my top three came to this question of like, well, imagine this future where there are, like, if we lost theaters, which we did actually for a couple of years with this pandemic, like, what are the things that I really would miss the most that I feel like no setup at home could really replicate in any way? And that's what really helps me form my list. So maybe more of a pessimistic kind of viewpoint. But again, we did live through this time period where, I mean, I didn't see a movie for about I think it was like over a year because of the theaters being closed. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a similar thing in my mind too while putting together my list. Not so much like, oh, if movie theaters never came back, what would happen? But more like, if I had not watched these movies that I am going to mention in the theater, how would my experience be different? Because we love movies, so obviously, if you're watching a good movie in a theater, if it's a good movie, it's going to be great. But
mhm.
there had to be something extra going on with the experience of watching it on the big screen, and that was important. And that's why this was a bit
Mm.
of a hard list, because there are so many great movies that I watched on the big screen that were amazing. But I had to think hard about, what if I stripped off the movie theater experience? Would I feel the same or differently about the movie
Oh, like if you had seen the movie on
on
DVD
TV?
instead or something, would that have affected the movie's impact on you? Yeah, that's interesting.
Exactly.
Why don't you start with what your number three is?
So my number three is this little movie called Knives Out from 2019. So in my framework of, what does watching movies on the big screen mean? The first thing that I really thought of was this communal sense of watching something with a whole bunch of strangers. And there's nothing better than laughter and suspense that really does that. So I really wanted a movie that signified that. It's sort of poignant, like we were saying, that this is only 2 years ago, or 2019. I am terrible at mental math, but not too long ago, where this happened, where I watched this movie in a packed theater in the first few weeks of when it came out, and it was delightful. And I think to me, it comes back down to great actors, people whom you are very familiar with, want to see playing people who are also deeply rooted in reality. Like you have your influencer lady in Toni Collette, you have, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis playing this self-made woman within quotes. So these are relatable people, but they're also heightened all within the context of this murder mystery whodunit. So to give you a little bit of a log line for people who haven't seen it, a detective investigates the death of a patriarch of an eccentric combative family. So, you know, this is obviously in the long tradition of a whole bunch of whodunits. I have a special fondness for this genre because I grew up with a lot of Poirot in my home. I still watch Poirot, sort of comfort TV to me, but it was interesting to watch this put on the big screen in this kind of lush way. And when I say lush, is everything from the house to Chris Evans and his sweater. It's all part of it. But it's not all just fluff only. And I think that's what's unique about this movie is that, yes, it's funny. Yes, it's well done, well acted, but it's playing with real themes that we care about. Themes of immigration, class divide, people of privilege who think they are doing the right thing, but really they're just selfish and obsessed with money and themselves. And you see variations of that, and all of that pulls you in. And then the center of the movie is Ana de Armas, who I'd never even heard of before. And it's sort of a genius bit of casting because since you've never seen this person, you have no opinions about them. Right. So it's hard to know, do you trust them or no? You're sympathetic to them, you're empathetic to them, but you're also kind of suspicious. And so it's interesting how Rian Johnson is sort of playing with your own baggage and your own perspectives and point of views on all these very prescient cultural themes that are happening, but it's all done in a very light-handed way, which is fun, entertaining, keeps you at the edge of your seat. And then, of course, you have a little bit of Benoit Blanc played by Daniel Craig, who is just ridiculous, but you know, it just all somehow comes together. So I love this movie. I don't know how much repeat value this movie has. I tried watching it this week, and after a little bit, I was like, okay, I know what's happening. And it's not even about the whodunit aspect. I think there's something about the first time punch of this movie that just cannot be replicated. And going back to that point of, if I had watched this movie on TV for the first time, I don't think it would have delivered the way it did watching it on the big screen. And I think a big part of that is the communal experience. I don't remember the last time where I actually made eye contact with a stranger sitting next to me while we were laughing, you know, on something. And I think that's pretty magical that can happen, and movies can bring you together in that fashion. So that's Knives Out, my number 3.
I actually did not see this film in the theaters. The whodunit genre is not something that is that appealing to me. So I just kind of fell through the cracks, even though I heard a lot of good things about it. And I streamed this during COVID in the first couple of months because, again, I heard a lot of great stuff. And then watched it, really liked the movie a lot. I thought it was interesting how the quote unquote twist, like they gave away kind of half of the twist really early on in the film, and explaining that, you know, she was involved in the death of the main, she being Ana de Armas was involved in the death of the main character or the father figure in the film. And that maybe that was the only twist, but then there's that extra twist at the end around Chris Evans, which was cool. And I guess how was the audience response to that? Was it like the whole theater gasping? Was it seem to be like, or was it mainly the responses was more on the comedic elements that you were seeing?
All of it, right? The gasps, as well as the comedic elements and how true to form these people feel, but they're also a little bit heightened.
Yeah.
But then there is a mystery at the end of it. And even with Ana de Armas, like I was saying, because you don't know who this person is, like literally, even as an actor, I kept questioning, is her narrative even real?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not, you know? So yeah, there's just a lot of excitement, enthusiasm. And, you know, we talk a lot about event movies, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that in our end sort of recap. I think whether intentioned or not, this is kind of an event movie, if you will, you know?
That's true, and it is actually interesting. Just going back to what we were talking about in the intro with just the shifting landscape, that this was a movie that was released in theaters. Lionsgate distributed the film, and it was very successful financially. And then Netflix actually bought the rights to all the sequels. They're going to make a whole big franchise out of this. So it's a small movie that did very well that's now being turned into a franchise for a streaming platform. I mean, who knows whether Netflix will do a theatrical release for Knives Out 2. So it is kind of interesting, actually, that this was on your list. I think you could make some connections just to the overall business about what's going on in Hollywood and distribution with this franchise.
Totally. I was going to get to that for sure. Like, this is case in point of the shifting landscape.
Yeah.
All right, what's your number 3?
Yeah, so my number 3 so this is some of my other picks do get into, actually the other two that I get to do get into the community aspect of a theater experience, but this was one where it's much more of a personal reaction that I had, and this was 1996's Mission Impossible. This is the first film of the Mission Impossible franchise, so at the time it wasn't even a franchise. The log line from IMDb: an American agent under false suspicion of disloyalty must discover and expose the real spy without the help of his organization. So this was Brian De Palma's director. Tom Cruise obviously starred in the film. I saw this in theaters when I was 14. So it's very young, but it really did leave a lasting impression on me in terms of the visceral reaction you can get from thrills and effects and suspense and action of seeing this on the big screen. It really kind of culminated for me in several sequences. There's a famous sequence in Langley where it's totally silent, where Tom Cruise is there just suspended from the ceiling, and it's a whole packed audience, but like nobody is saying anything. And there's the sweat drop is about to fall on the floor, which would set off the alarms, and Tom Cruise is trying not to do that. You just hear everyone just like this collective gasp. So it's definitely that is really amazing. But for me, it really sums up this whole experience of this movie being in theaters for me is summed up in the final sequence, which is the Tom Cruise in the Channel train sequence. So it's very end of the film. Very actually similar. The sequence starts where De Palma doesn't have any sound in it at all. I'm sorry, musical score, I should say. Right. So you're really just feeling all the sounds of Tom Cruise being on top of this train. And then it culminates in this incredible sequence where he jumps onto this helicopter that's chasing him inside of the channel. All of a sudden, the Mission Impossible theme song kicks into gear, and he, blows up the helicopter, kills the bad guy in this incredible visual effects shot. And it really just, for me, like, I think we touched on this in the previous episode, like the mise en scène, sort of all the parts of film kind of coming together, from Tom Cruise's acting in that scene, ILM, incredible special effects that just on the big screen were something that really impacted me. And then just the music, like Danny Elfman did the score and really pulled a lot from Bernard Herrmann, because obviously De Palma, so it's got to be a Hitchcock influenced film, which it definitely was. And yeah, that spectacle, I was actually on the edge of my seat. Like, I remember specifically being 14, and after that whole thing was over, and Tom Cruise didn't die and he won, and then the train stops and everything, just realizing, oh my God, like my hands are like gripping the seat. I'm literally on the edge of my seat. Like, I thought that was just an expression. Like, I didn't know this was a real thing. So it really just encapsulates to me something where on the big screen with the audience, with the big sound, that it has this impact on you that, as big as your TV could be at home, nothing could really ever capture that. And then, subsequently after that, I've experienced that same sort of thrill and sensation. But that first time left such a lasting impression on me, like, wow, like this stuff, these big budget, big action, suspense thriller movies really can have a big impact on you when you're in the theater. I'll never forget that moment.
I'm almost jealous of you that you got to watch this when you were of that age, because I watched this like much later in my life, not in the theater, and it still obviously is iconic and completely mesmerized me and such. But watching it on the big screen, like you said, but at that age, I can't even imagine what that would do to a mind of a 14-year-old, because it's sort of, you haven't experienced or seen anything like it. I mean, most people probably haven't, but especially at that age. So yeah. What a great pick. I feel like this is, and we'll get to this on my list hopefully as well, but to me, this is kind of like the best of blockbuster coming together with something that has something to say, but is also entertaining. It's not just all fluff. It's not just, a piece for the heck of it, but there's sort of meaning and reason behind it, and it's done deftly in all departments, right? It's not just the director's showpiece. It's everything coming together, like you said. So
Yeah, I
I love
mean,
this movie, and what a great career, for Tom Cruise. I mean, there's a part of me, and you and I, we've talked about this, that I miss him doing more adult dramas. But, hey, as we have this conversation, maybe he had a pulse on the business way ahead, that if I want to survive and continue to kind of be relevant, not just in this country, but globally, I got to kind of get on, a franchise train, but also make it meaningful. And he has. So I guess he's having the last laugh.
yeah, no, he's very, very good business sense for sure. I mean, this is the first movie he actually produced. He started his production company, and this was the first one that he chose. And I think there were a lot of probably, I mean, whether you easily to look back and say he knew what he was doing, but I'm sure he did in terms of picking this to be his main vehicle. And then, like you said, I think seeing this landscape shifting more towards this direction. I mean, he definitely has weathered a lot of storms. It just, even with his personal popularity, but coming back to this franchise helps rejuvenate himself and continue on his career. So it was just a brilliant move for him, for sure.
Couldn't agree more. And then, what a great soundtrack.
Oh yeah, for sure. I even still listen to that that score when I need to get pumped up, or when I'm working out, like that last 2 minutes during that train sequence, because I can jump back to feeling like I was when I was 14 in that theater seat. Like I can still capture that emotion if I want to. Even watching the sequence on my phone, like if I just pull it up on YouTube and just watch on my phone, like I can still, because I have that memory, kind of transport myself back to what that was like. So it's definitely definitely fun. Amazing. Cool.
Power
yes. Definitely. So yeah, what's your number two?
All right, it's a good segue into blockbusters that has something to say. It's Dune from 2021. I think a lot of the same themes that you were talking about, like I put this because a big part of my framework of watching movies on the big screen were this transportive, immersive quality that can only be achieved on a big screen with that level of sort of sound effects and sound quality going around with you. You can't replicate that on your home screen, no matter how big that is. And also watching with other people. I think to me, this signifies the best of a communal experience that's also transportive. And I also put this on the list because this movie sort of came in the middle of a pandemic. And I will never shake off the feeling of, first of all, lining up to get inside the theater. I thought first the queues are there because they're probably checking vaccines and such. And I was like, oh no, there are just a lot of people that need to get in. And the whole theater was packed. And it was sort of, this glee moment that, oh, we might be back at the movies, which is pretty amazing. But most people probably know about this movie, but the log line essentially of this is feature adaptation of Frank Herbert's science fiction novel about the son of a noble family entrusted with the protection of the most valuable asset and most vital element in the galaxy. So the other reason sort of why I put this, it's once again, like you were saying, the mise-en-scène of it all. Like this is a movie where I really felt all the departments work in concert and they come together.
Yeah.
Look, I didn't grow up reading the book. I hadn't even watched the David Lynch movie or any of the other versions that have been created. So I'm wasn't familiar with the mythology of the movie at all. And the fact that this movie can dole out all that information and detail and yet keep me leaned in. I remember actually not edge of the seat, but sort of leaned in towards this giant IMAX screen because I just wanted every bit of it. And I've thought about it since that. Why is that? And I think a lot of it has to do with the technical details and such of it, and how beautifully these worlds are realized, that you are truly, truly, truly transported. But I think it's a lot more than that. It is about, number one, dealing with themes that we care about: the planet, colonization, power, coming of age, mothers and sons, fathers and sons. There's a lot at play here, big global themes that affect all of us as a society and a planet, but also intimate themes. Then number two, it's sort of layered in with great performances. I mean, it's almost kind of an embarrassment of riches in terms of who they got. And it's also kind of sad that the movie's not gotten that much attention for his performances, but you don't care about any, at least I wouldn't care about any of the stuff if I was not sort of pulled in by the people who were portraying what they were portraying. And so if you add all that up, great world building, technical details, relevant themes, great performances, what you're left with is a sense of wonder and wow, but also a sense of emotionality and a little bit of sort of mysterious kind of, sand-like, spice-like quality, pun intended, that you really can't wrap your head around. And that's what good transportive experiences do. They leave you. And in this movie, particularly, everything is not tied with a pretty bow. In fact, it's left for you to just sit in your theater seat and, be sort of gobsmacked, but also left a little bit hanging because the movie is only the first part. So I don't know. I sort of, and you and I, we said this, I think, after we'd both watched the movie, that this sort of felt like a 2001 like experience where you're going to look back 30 years from now and sort of feel that, oh, something pretty out there and pretty genius and incredible was put on the screens. And I'm so glad that the movie came out. I'm so glad that the movie did well. There are many such experiences that I've had in the theater, but I think I wanted to put this just as an homage to the times that we live in, and the fact that this movie could come out and do so well and be a popcorn movie, but also have so much to say, so much to unpack, which happens very rarely. So yeah, that's Dune, number 2.
Yeah, no, I saw this movie as well at Chinese IMAX opening weekend. So it's a packed audience, obviously huge screen, incredible sound design. And it was, especially with the sound, I was thinking like, if I had watched this, because it was streaming on HBO Max as well at the same time. It's like, yeah, I could watch this at home, and I have a good sound system. However, there'd be nothing like what the sound design would not have come across as strongly as it would have watching it at home. So I definitely, and the scale of the visuals was something you really do need to see in a theater, like on the level of like a Lawrence of Arabia in terms of the scope of what he was able to do. I also found it was really interesting because I had not read the book, though I went with one of my best friends who had just recently read the book and was kind of really excited to see the film. I'd seen the Lynch movie, but so long ago that I forgot what it was like. But it's always interesting to me to go into movies like this where so many, because this was also opening weekend, so many of the people there are like huge fans of the franchise, but I am not one of them. Like normally I am one of the fanboys of like a Star Wars film or a Marvel film. Like I'm part of that. And very rarely am I going to a movie like this where I'm not part of that community and just being on the outside, but then taking in the film, obviously, but just seeing how the audience reacts and hearing the fanboys talk afterwards about how they felt about it, being on the inside of this community of people that are Dune heads, is always just fascinating to me to be like, yeah, I'm not part of this, but like I can experience it a little bit as well. Another time that was similar to this was when I saw the first Harry Potter movie. I had never read any of the books, but I just wanted to glom myself onto the franchise, I guess. Actually, my roommate and I painted our foreheads with a Harry Potter scar as if we were fans, even though none of us had read the book, and went to the movie and then fell in love with the franchise. And I've read all the books now and things, but it's always interesting when you're kind of outside of the community of a fan base, see how they're taking in something. And definitely like the folks afterwards were all like, oh my God, he's like, someone was saying something like this was more Dune than the book was even Dune. Like he captured Dune more than Dune captured Dune. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, clearly the fans like this as much as someone who like me, who has no, really much of a background in what the Dune mythology was. But to your point earlier too, I think what Villeneuve did so well was the world building in this movie was so amazing, where it didn't feel like exposition dump or like, as again, someone who's a Dune novice, I didn't know any of this stuff, but I felt like I knew enough. Like he knew when to back off and give you the story and then when to kind of interject some elements of exposition, which you do need to understand because there's a lot of complicated things in this universe to know. But it's one of the best examples of world building, like a James Cameron level world building that I had, very few directors can pull off. And I think that is what he did the best in this.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, I know what the worm is. I know how to walk in the sand when if shit, hit the fan. Like I know. And I had none of these skills when I walked into the theater. But I think it sort of speaks to, if I could add to what you were saying, like we live in a world of franchises and MCU and what have you, where there's a lot of fandom that is driving all of that. And I love those movies, and we watched several of those together, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But I think what was so genius about this is that its fan base is not at the same level as those movies, and the fact that this movie could still appeal to the non-fan people and sort of be more mainstream, if you will, at the same time, I think that's pretty amazing. And I kind of look, not that every movie should be like this going forward, but I think it gives me hope that you can be a non-superhero movie and be complicated and have world themes and such and still be an event. And that gives me some hope in terms of the business going forward as well.
That's true. Yeah. It's really hard to walk that line between pleasing the fans, which you need to do to make a successful film in this way, but you also have to reach a wide audience. So you have to please the Dune heads that were like freaking out after the movie that I saw, like, oh, this is so Dune, and me who's never read Dune but still really loved the movie. I mean, that's a very, very hard thing to do, and I think definitely Villeneuve gets a lot of credit for that. And to your point too, I hope that this is a lesson that is learned from this world of IP and franchise, which I don't think we will escape from. I think that's just the economics of the business nowadays. There'll be less and less IP based things, but that the filmmakers are still able to craft something that can be an event for more than people that have just seen the Dune miniseries or read the book, but really to everyone, and make these grand statements and be that popular. I think definitely this is great. We're talking about this film too, because I think that's important just for the future of the theatrical business in terms of quality.
Totally. So what's your number two?
Yeah, so my number two is a film from 2003, Kill Bill Volume 1. So the IMDb plot here: after awakening from a 4-year coma, a former assassin wreaks vengeance on the team of assassins who betrayed her. And this is Quentin Tarantino film starring Uma Thurman, Lucy Liu, among others. And I put this movie on the list because it really speaks a lot to the social aspects of film for me. So I saw this movie on the opening night at midnight, actually, in London. So at the time I was studying abroad. And I had seen a couple movies. I've been there a couple months already. So I'd seen movies in London before in my time there, but basically just myself, I would go because none of the other housemates that I was living with that were part of the program I was in were big movie fans. So I would go out to the movies. But this one, I don't even know how I necessarily did it, but I convinced the entire house to be like, we got to go to a midnight show. This movie's going to be great. These were not film fans. Some of them had heard of Quentin Tarantino, but it wasn't, something that they were necessarily excited to do. It was like my kind of turn to do something social for the whole group. So about 15 or so of us. And yeah, we went to this big theater in Leicester Square in London, midnight show. And I mean, that movie is like such a crowd pleasing movie. A lot of just incredible scenes, especially the crazy 88 battle at the end where Uma Thurman's, cutting limbs off of all these assassins. And everyone, was mainly our group, honestly, were very loud, clapping, cheering, gasping. And it was interesting. I was thinking like, well, maybe this is just like an American thing. In terms of being this loud at a movie, and hopefully the other people in the audience weren't kind of pissed that we were doing this, but it really just was important for me to really understand, like, yeah, this is like a social bonding experience you can have with your friends and enjoying and laughing and, clapping at these incredibly over the top action scenes is this feeling that, yeah, you can get this at home. But it works a lot better in the big screen, especially then when there's people you don't even know that you can participate with this in. So this movie definitely was, this experience was something that's lasting on me for years now in terms of just an incredible theatrical experience. I mean, I also really love the movie. Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorite directors. I think this is my favorite film of his, actually.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
I just Absolutely love this movie. It's a mishmash of all the genres that I already kind of liked, which is like, Hong Kong action cinema, sword and sandals, a little bit of the spaghetti Western thrown in, more so in volume 2 than volume 1. But, Quentin Tarantino is all about mashing up genres. And this is like all my favorite genres mashed into one, and just incredible experience. But again, I think this just shows to me that sense of community that you can have, and a shared experience to that level in a theater with, again, people you don't know, but then also your best friends. It was just a great memory that will always be a lasting impression for me in terms of the theater.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like watching this with a whole bunch of people in the theater where all this madness is happening, what that would do. Do you even walk out, of the theater without not imagining like blood sprays all over you? Probably not.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, no, and two, like the ending was that twist ending of like when they reveal that Uma Thurman's daughter, who she was pregnant when she got attacked initially in the flashbacks by these people she's trying to get revenge on. She thought her daughter was dead and her daughter was like alive. And I remember like the whole audience like, oh my God, like this big collective gasp of like an amazing twist ending that everyone then is talking about, that you can hear talking about leaving the theater. So yeah, it's definitely was a lasting impression.
I can only imagine. So I had avoided this movie for a long, long time because I don't like any of the genres that you mentioned, particularly. And I'd heard about all the bloodiness and such, and I was like, this is not my thing. And, I don't know if I'm any director's head per se, because I just not in my personality. Sure, I'll, jump up to go and watch something that's been done by somebody who I really appreciate, but I try and judge the movie on what it is, more so than who it's done by and who are the people involved. Of course, that factors in, but I'm not just going to blindly, follow people. There are some exceptions, but mostly I don't. So with Tarantino, I obviously love many of his movies, but I don't know, there is something about him that also repels me, and I know I'm not the only one in that. As much as I admire him as a filmmaker, so for all those reasons, I sort of avoided this movie, and then I finally watched it very recently and was kind of blown away. Like this, I should not like this movie for what it has to offer. This is not my kind of movie at all.
Right.
The fact that I was totally pulled in. It's brilliantly done. The score is so amazing.
Yeah.
It's probably now which is funny, I'm coming back to this movie like now, in the year of 2021, 2022, but it's probably one of my favorite scores now because it's just so amazingly done. The pacing of the movie is so amazing because, on the surface of it, like this movie really doesn't have much to say. Like it's just a set piece directorial vision that's executed brilliantly, and you can just take it for that. But then, and that's how I took it when I was watching the movie, and that's a part of me also felt like what a vain exercise this is in somebody's own egotistical pursuits. But then as I stepped away from the movie stayed with me, and I think a lot of it has to do with Uma Thurman and the performances, and there's something sort of haunting about it. There's sort of other societal things about power of women, and the fact that the movie doesn't judge its people and its characters one bit. It's also a movie about mastering the skills, like how you really see her learn how to use the sword and how all these amazing aspects of this assassin world, be it the weapons and such, how they are put together and created. There's like mastery and skill in all of that. So I don't know, I'm still processing it, but the point that I want to make was that it has a lot more to offer than just meets the eye, and I'm pleasantly surprised by it. But yeah, I can't even imagine what watching this movie on the big screen with a bunch of people would be like. Yeah.
I'm glad you did see it and were able to like pleasantly surprised in terms of your reaction that you actually enjoyed the film. It's always exciting when you kind of uncover something that for a while either you've been avoiding or didn't. I'm not going to like this, so I'm not going to watch it. And then when you do, you're like, oh, actually, that was kind of good. The part two, it's interesting because he moved a lot of the action is really in part one. It's a very different movie than part two, actually, which is lacking on a lot of the same action. So if you kind of go in expecting the same thing, it's not really that, which was interesting. Actually, funnily enough, the same group I saw part one with, who was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. We then got together as a reunion back in the States and saw part two together. I think it came out in April of the next following year. And it was fun to see everyone, but it also was, people were like, oh, that was not the same. And it's not as much of a crowd pleasing movie as the first one was. So it's just interesting that dynamic there. But yeah, it definitely, especially interesting too, because the movie is, again, much of his version of like these, Shaw Brothers films out of Hong Kong. But if you don't know those genres, you're not expecting that moment when an arm gets cut off and then the blood starts spraying everywhere. Like that was, I remember that being like, especially my friends who like didn't really expect what was going to happen, just like freaking out and like laughing and being like, because it was a super surprise. Whereas I'm like, okay, I think I know like what he's trying to do here and where this could go. But yeah, definitely another moment in the theater that I feel just everyone just being like, oh my God, I didn't think it was going to go this way was really cool.
Yeah, I didn't know it would be that, it was going to be that heightened. But that again, like kudos to him. Like this movie could be unwatchable actually for all its gore, but because it's so highly stylized and heightened, it almost becomes ridiculous and kind of comical, which is sort of the point. But there's such a great tone handling that's happening over there. Yeah, because on the face of it, like I said, this is not a movie for me.
Right.
So now I'm very happy to have watched it, and also what a great example, I think, for you for a communal experience, because you watched it with the same people again, part two. That's pretty amazing. That doesn't happen very often, especially in the times we live in. So
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so my number one.
Yeah.
Speaking of sort of shock, because at the very top of the episode I mentioned, like when it comes to communal experiences, laughter, humor, suspense are definitely uniting forces in that. I think the other one is shock, which your pick had, and I think my pick also has a boatload of it, but in a very different way, which is The Master from 2012. The logline of the movie is: a naval veteran arrives home from war, unsettled and uncertain of his future, until he is tantalized by the cause, capital C, and its charismatic leader. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, a whole bunch of other great people. So I put this movie on here because, look, Alex, that I have walked out of many, many movies. And usually it's because I'm bored, and it's what I call the restroom test. Meaning, if I had to go somewhere in the middle of the 3/4, third act of the movie to go to the restroom, and if I don't sort of want to go back in, I don't go back in, because it means that the movie has sort of lost me. And maybe this is not a great thing to say on a movie podcast, because it's probably sacrilegious to like leave a movie. But I say this because this is a movie that I did not leave, spoiler alert, for it failing the bathroom test, but because I just couldn't be in this space for any longer, for how much it shook me and how much it affected me. So I watched this, I want to say the first month of its coming out, at the ArcLight, our favorite place in LA. This was the time when I lived in LA. I actually didn't have that much background on PTA. I'd watched Boogie Nights. And again, like I said, I'm not ahead of anybody. So there are a bunch of PTA heads and such all around me. I could sense it. And I was like, what is happening? This is like a convention or, a cult in a cult. But again, but I was looking forward to it, definitely. And I kept watching it until the scene in the jail when Joaquin Phoenix is literally hurling his body to the railings of the jail and such. And that's when I was like, I don't think I can take this anymore. And I left. And for years, I did not come back to this movie, didn't want to interrogate my thoughts or my feelings towards it. I don't think I've had an experience in the movie theaters of this kind, which was so jolting that I couldn't even be in the same space. So yes, transportive, but in a very different kind of way, where I just felt like I was alone in a sea of people and just couldn't take it anymore, even though it was in a packed house. So since then, I've watched the movie a few times and I've interrogated why this happened and why this is so memorable for me. For this reason is because many things, I think. So on the thematic level, I think this movie does such an amazing job of playing with loneliness, you being really troubled, forming a friendship, but then this friendship also being a bit of a toxic sort of relationship, because in order for it to work, it has to keep the cause, which is the cult, going. So the two people almost cannot escape their traumas and their fears, because if that happens, everything else breaks. And I think it hit me at a time when I was fairly new in LA. Loneliness was definitely a big topic on my mind. I was making new friends. And I think there's something about those themes kind of really hitting me at a time, at a place which, not that I was expecting this to happen to me, but it sort of just touched me and pushed my buttons in such a way that I just couldn't contain it, couldn't contain myself in my seat, literally. And then it's further layered by probably some of the most brilliant performances in the last 20 years or so that I can think of, where Joaquin Phoenix gives just like contorted ghost performance. His body is sort of convoluted and so odd, and you look at his face and his face looks like he's carrying all the pain and the ghost that he's seen on his face. And even before he meets Joaquin Phoenix, like the scenes on the ship or the scenes in the department store where he's working, it's just heartbreaking, unbelievable. Like that in itself is very unsettling to watch. And then you meet Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's on the surface majestic and confident and alluring and attractive and such, but also if you look into his eyes, he's a hollow, fearful man, because maybe somewhere deep down he knows what he's prescribing is bullshit, or maybe the movement so far has worked and now it's becoming bigger, almost a religion, and people are expecting for answers and he ain't got any. So maybe it's just fear of, what am I going to tell them? They're going to find out. And then you have Amy Adams, who's sort of this still character in the back, who's sort of controlling in many ways the cause. Like if you remove her, probably Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix run away to some other city and start fresh, So she is sort of this still agent of chaos, which again is just, each of these people are so unsettling in their own way. And then talk about the mise-en-scène and the departments all coming together, from the brilliant cinematography. You literally feel like you are in post-World War II times. Just the color, Johnny Greenwood's amazing score that sort of permeates, it creates this unsettling yet alluring ambiance. I don't know, what can I say? It's sort of movie making at its finest in many ways, to the point that it's so dense that you need to come back to it several times if you have the stomach for it to even pass it. And again, going back to, would I have had a similar reaction had I watched this at home? Probably not. I think it is about watching movies on the big screen with a bunch of people that sort of shock you and stir you in that way. where you can't even sit in the theater. This can only happen on the big screen, I think. I don't think this would have happened if I'd watched it at home. And selfishly, I also wanted to put like an adult drama over here and sort of prove the point that, yeah, it is an event movie. To me, Licorice Pizza this year was an event movie because of its legacy and such. But it doesn't have to be IP. It doesn't have to be all, hunky-dory, bunch of people having fun. It can be something serious and transgressive and transportive and yet be worthy of watching on the big screen when done right. So that's number one for me, The Master, the movie I didn't finish.
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually never walked out of a movie before. So it's just interesting. Yeah. That this movie left that much of an impression on you in the theater that it was just something that you couldn't take anymore. But it is interesting, that in terms of, if you had seen that at home, like at home, there are distractions. It's easier for you. You can kind of get up whenever you want. Maybe you pause and maybe you don't. Kind of come back to it. It's easy to kind of detach yourself from that world. So perhaps the intensity of the intense feeling of loneliness and all the horrible things that were going on in Joaquin's head, and then also through his performance in terms of it definitely being hard to watch, wouldn't have hit you as much probably, I think, because you could kind of not be in it 100% all the time. Whereas in a movie, you really do have that, your attention is 100% on that. So it can affect you a lot more. And this clearly did have an effect. So I had seen this in theaters as well at the ArcLight as well when it came out. And
maybe we were sitting in the same theater.
Maybe. And I was like, why is that guy getting up? Hopefully he's coming back. Like I am not a huge P.T. Anderson fan. I can respect his movies, but I haven't loved a lot of them. And I do though think it's very interesting, like his filmography and his artistic point of view definitely seems to be a lot about California, in the same way you can maybe categorize Woody Allen or Scorsese as like, oh, they, write about New York City and that's sort of in their movies, whether it's set in New York or not, there's that feeling in it. I definitely feel like P.T. Anderson's consistently commenting on California and the culture that we have here and the differences in our society. And this movie definitely I do think speaks a lot to that shallowness, I guess. It's like everyone is like, and even Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, like, yeah, he's nice, but like he's very surface level, because you're right, he doesn't actually have answers. But because in California, I feel like people can, you can kind of form these looser, less deep connections. It allows for people then to be able to create these religions that kind of, once you start poking at it a little bit, then it falls apart, but no one really pokes at it because that's sort of the way that, the culture sometimes is here in California. And there definitely is that sense of loneliness then, where you're feeling like you're not really making connections. You can't really fit in, even though there's people all around you and, everyone's really nice and really friendly. And I think that's a lot of what Joaquin's character, obviously he has that PTSD that he's dealing with as well from the war, but he's able to survive in California, I feel, where he wouldn't maybe be able to do that in other places. So it's interesting that, you being freshly moved to LA when you saw it too, and kind of having those same kind of feelings of I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like loneliness or a little bit of isolation or something. And maybe that the focus in on that in this movie really affected you because it was that time.
It's funny, I didn't actually put the California connection in my head, but that's so true. I mean, they literally show Pasadena. I didn't live that far from there. I lived on the border of Glendale, Pasadena when I moved to LA. So yeah, go figure.
Yeah. My main reaction to this movie when I saw it was a little more like disappointment in the fact that, because it was 70 millimeter release, like he shot it on 65, and it was like that. I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is going to be very visual. Obviously the film he made before that, There Will Be Blood, it was just, I think his best film, and one that just is like amazing to see, like just the scope of it. And this movie was just so much, like so many close-ups and so much more about portraiture. It was, and it was like what was in the frame and how he arranged it was more what he was focusing on, which disappointed me because like my expectations were like, oh, coming off of There Will Be Blood and it's 70 millimeter. What is this going to look like? And it was all in like, small confined spaces, which again, I think was what he was trying to say. I mean, he used the his visual style, I think, fit the narrative and the themes he was talking about. But to me, as someone who was coming in there, not a huge P.T. Anderson fan necessarily, and expecting some very cinematic, quote unquote, from like a visual perspective film, I just remember walking out being like, that was disappointing in that respect. And then also because the characters, like you were saying too, are so odd and like off-putting on purpose, they are, but that was just helped me or made it harder for me to be interested in what was going on. But I've seen the film since then and definitely can grow to appreciate it a lot more, but it's still not, it doesn't like touch or speak to me. And I think that's just an issue I have with most of his films. Like I'm not able to like reach some deeper connection with them. Some of them definitely, Licorice Pizza and There Will Be Blood and Punch Drunk Love, but the rest of his filmography I still find a little elusive. Maybe someday I'll be in the right headspace to all of a sudden have an epiphany moment on Inherent Vice or something, but we'll see.
Yeah, I doubt about that one.
You never know.
You never know. But yeah, this one, I think it was very elusive to me for a while. And I think I've started to grasp it more than I could potentially earlier. Mm-hmm. And in interesting ways, look back at my own life, as well, and trace it as I watch the movie over and over again. So in some ways, it actually does feel emotional and personal now. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting what you say, that on first brush and even second brush, it doesn't feel emotional at all. It's very hard to grasp. And maybe that's why he's such an interesting filmmaker, mm-hmm. Perhaps. And I guess the 70 millimeter stuff, like, to be honest, this was pretty early in my sort of film immersion, if you will. I didn't even really understand the difference between that versus not 70 millimeter. But what it did do was this, creation of claustrophobia, mm-hmm. in these confined places where, yeah, you're watching the main action, but then Amy Adams is sitting in the corner at the end doing stuff with her eyes and her face. And it's adding to this simmering quality of unsettlement. And then I finally walk out. I right. don't think that happens if it's not done the way it's done. It's not just the characters. It is the cinematography, the 70 mm-hmm. millimeter of it all, the score, it all is kind of layered up. But yeah, it's a weird one for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's your number one?
Okay, so my number one is Star Wars Episode 2: Attack of the Clones. Came out in 2002. The IMDb
the master, basically.
Exactly. The IMDb plot summary there. 10 years after initially meeting, Anakin Skywalker shares a forbidden romance with Padme Amidala, while Obi-Wan Kenobi investigates an assassination attempt on the senator and discovers a secret clone army crafted by the Jedi. So obviously Star Wars film, part of the prequel trilogy, directed by George Lucas. And I put this movie on the list for the reason that it, for me, really for the first time encapsulated this feeling of a film community where the movie theater was like a destination in a sense of like a church for people that loved movies. So for this film, I'm a huge Star Wars fan my entire life. I'd seen Episode 1 opening night, but I think it's like a 7 p.m. show. And since that point, I had then discovered going to midnight shows. So I've been going to midnight shows for a couple years before seeing Attack of the Clones. And for this movie, because it was so hyped, not only did I see it at midnight, but me and my close friends in college actually camped out in front of the theater for about 2 nights because we wanted to get good seats. So this is before assigned seats. So, you couldn't book your tickets, in advance. You get the tickets online, but you couldn't book your seats in advance. I mean, we wanted good seats. It's a Star Wars movie. So we went down to the Irvine Spectrum, which is a theater down in Orange County, and then basically pitched a tent in front of the theater and camped there for 2 nights to make sure we got good seats. But we were there in this line with maybe like 50, 60 other people. We had every day kind of growing. And it was great. Like people set up TVs, watching Star Wars, computers, playing Star Wars video games. We were all like, we met people, we're talking about things, doing like Star Wars trivia. It was really like this whole sense of, these are all the Star Wars fans now gathered in one place. in front of this theater. And then everyone, talking about what was exciting about them in this movie, speculating fan theories, all this stuff. It was like an internet message board in real life, basically. And then everyone kind of going into the theater, obviously, enjoying the film because it's Star Wars and we're there, people jumping up and clapping in the theater and standing up and things like that. And then afterwards, all the dialogue, of people, talking about what they thought about the film would immediately happen. But it was really this first time, like, wow, there really is this big community here. Yes, it's around Star Wars, which is not just about film, but this IP, but it was really the sense that, yeah, this is a place, a theater that is the gathering point for all these people that really love this particular film franchise. And then without the theater, all these things could still happen online. Again, like there'd be message boards or chat rooms. You watch like YouTube reviews or go on Twitter or something. But having a physical destination that everyone can flock to, only, Star Wars movies are rare as well. It's like one every, 3 years back then. And then 10 years, every trilogy and things. So it's a rare opportunity just seeing all these fans and meeting all these people and the shared love of going to the movies. Was something that still is special to me. And that's one of the reasons why I love going to midnight shows, did for a long time. Now it's like, I'm older, so not midnight, but, opening night for like the Marvel film or these IP franchises that I really like, because it is that sense of everyone kind of getting together in their church of worship for whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or whatever the IP is. It's being part of that community is something that's very, very special that, I really feel is important to me in terms of what that theatrical experience is like. And it's something I'll never forget either. It's crazy. Looking back on it, it's kind of crazy that I did that. But, you're in college, you got time. Why not set up a tent and camp out in front of a movie theater?
No, I mean, it sounds super, super fun. What are your thoughts on the movie? And especially when you watched it that first time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you watched it since. And is it the same, or did you love the movie when you watched it?
That's a great
deliver, after this hype and 2-day marathon that you had leading up to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the time, so I saw it at midnight and then went back the next morning and saw it at 10:30 in the morning at the same theater, and then saw it again, I believe, like 2 or 3 days later. I think in total, I saw it about 5 times in the theater, and I loved it. I filmed a documentary about my friends and I anticipating this movie. So it was over like 30 days. And afterwards, I can go back and watch like my review of the film, be like, oh my God, it's so much better than episode 1. And all these things have been loved. And oh my God. Now, in my opinion, it's the weakest of the 6 Star Wars movies that George Lucas made. Like, I still like parts of it, but all the flaws have kind of come out to me now. And actually, I think the first episode 1, Phantom Menace, is a much better film and ages a lot better than this one did. So it definitely was like in the moment, you have this feeling because of, you want to like the movie. It's there. You have everyone cheering and getting up when Yoda pulls out his lightsaber for the first time and people didn't expect that and, all that stuff. So there definitely was a of the moment thing, like a halo effect from that first screening that definitely, after then seeing it, many years later, I've seen the movie like dozens and dozens of times now on video, but it's not necessarily that and maybe like the video experience too, like makes the flaws stand out a little more because I'm not going to defend this as a good work of art or even like one of the better Star Wars films. So definitely like the experience does, did color my opinion of the film for a while, though now I can kind of look back and say, no, it's the weakest of the 6, but there's still some amazing moments that I remember seeing for the first time in the theater. So definitely there is that experience. If I saw it on DVD, I'd probably be like, I don't know, this isn't as good as I might have expected. So definitely it was interesting kind of going back and seeing my opinions there and how much they've changed.
All I'm thinking of is if I could somehow be transported back in time and meet you and the gang at this tent the night before, what would that be like?
Maybe you're one of those, because we were getting like, I don't want to say like teased, but like we're in a mall. So like there are all these people like going out to CPK and then they'd be like, what are you guys doing? And we'd be like, yeah, we're standing in line for Star Wars. Like, oh, okay. Like they'd be like, you guys are just stupid, which was fun too. But yeah, you might have been this people being like,
been in that gap.
Yeah, getting your CPK takeout.
CPK.
Being like, what are you like? Really? You guys are doing this for a movie? Like ridiculous. But yeah.
In some ways, I'm jealous though, because as Well, who knows? Maybe this will happen someday, but I don't see myself doing that ever. I haven't done that ever for any movie. Like I want to see it, but I'll wait for it. I'll sort of figure out a way to kind of go see it. And I also, in many ways, like watching movies alone in the third row where there aren't that many people. So, and they're there in the background just to make me feel like I am watching with a bunch of people, but they're not with me. But I think it also comes down to the kind of movie. Like, you and I, and you've been so great at orchestrating, communal movie going experiences, especially with the MCU movies. And I can say this for sure that those movies would not mean anything to me if I had not seen them with you and the gang. Like watching these movies and appreciating them, especially as a non-fan of any of the IP that's out there pretty much, it has to do with the communal experience, 100%. So going back to this movie, I had never seen it before. I watched it this week. And I'm sorry to say, I could not make it past the 45-minute mark.
What part of the film is that? I'm just curious on where you made it. Was it the cloning facility? Did you make it to the cloning, like the rain planet Camino, when like there was all the rain? And okay. I'm trying to think if that's probably around the 40-minute mark. When Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah, that's the weaker part of the film. The third act, the last reel is amazing. So if anything, maybe you should have just skipped ahead and just watched there's a huge action scene at the end that kind of saves the film. That was the only part that I can kind of look back now and be like, that's good. The rest of it, a lot of problems. So I'm not surprised, especially as someone who's not a big fan of Star Wars to begin with necessarily. This would be not the film that I'd recommend anyone watch.
Probably not. And I knew that going in.
Yeah, totally. Right.
But yeah, maybe I'll go back and watch the last part. But, having said that, there aren't even the MCU movies, and I'm sure you will agree with this, cannot be compared to the Star Wars legacy.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a reason, even I as a non-fan can see that, what these movies were, what they've created over a period of time. Once again, is the mise-en-scène, the characters, the journey, the myth surrounding it all. In many ways, you tell me, but it seems to me everything we know about fandom comes from here in our modern world. It sort of created this whole phenomenon, really, right?
Yeah. I think the difference, one of the main differences just with Star Wars is it is an auteur's vision of one particular artist expressing his art versus an IP that other artists can interpret in different ways and more of a business. George was never, obviously he lucked into being a billionaire because of this, but it wasn't anything where he was setting out to sort of artificially create some franchise that can sell McDonald's toys. Like this was his artistic expression of his worldview. And I think that's why those first 6 movies are very special. And you can see the difference when the corporation takes over, which is Disney, and what they were now thinking about, what were the McDonald's meals we can create. And it's much more of a business decision, and the art has been stripped out of it. And that's why those movies aren't as good, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you think in the world that we live in today, and specifically with the theatrical experience question mark of it all, does a Star Wars legacy get created or not? And I'm sort of going back to your, the theater as a church comment, which I think has a big role to play in making the legacy of these movies. So I'm curious if say Star Wars, the very first movie were to come out now, let's just, put a pin on the pandemic for a second.
Yeah.
Does this unfold the way it did?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Just looking back even at the films that we were just talking about, and maybe Knives Out is an example of that's now going to be a franchise IP that was original, that was, created again by Rian Johnson, who wrote and directed the film. So that is, his vision of that. And now that is who knows whether it'll be successful, especially now if it becomes a streaming franchise as opposed to in theatrical. But I think I'd have to say with that specific question that Star Wars, because it is the art will always no matter when that came out, I think it still would have touched people because of just the art is that good. That first original Star Wars film from '77. But I do think the landscape now is definitely something where business incentives are less on finding new IP. They're more on finding a known quantity where we can ensure at least there's some audience that's going to show up to a theater, because it's much harder to produce and then distribute and market films now, and more expensive nowadays than it was, even 20 years ago. So I think it's really going to be much actually with Rian Johnson. And it's interesting, actually, if you look back at all of our films that we were talking about, they are, other than maybe Mission Impossible franchise, but, we have P.T. Anderson, Rian Johnson, Quentin Tarantino, these all are auteurs. And in a way, they are their own IP in a certain sense. And I feel like nowadays, unless you are one of those, and Villeneuve as well, if you're one of those artists who kind of has their own fan base already, the studio system will not trust you with something new. And, James Cameron's would be the rare exception, right? He created Avatar, which is a brand new franchise. Versus, Marvel, which is churning out all these, characters that have been around for decades. So I really do feel that unless you are at the level of a Tarantino or P.T. Anderson or Villeneuve, where you have that credibility and that history of box office success, they're not going to give you the keys to try something new. And it's just going to be this endless, and you can still find art in IP. Like, I'm not discounting the MCU. I think there's some incredible movies in there with great artists expressing their particular visions among the confines of Marvel. But I think that's the world we're going to be living in, for better or for worse, in terms of the theatrical experience.
Right, totally. Hi, Marty. If you're listening, I'm here. That was my quick nod to Scorsese.
Oh.
No, I totally agree. I guess my question was more around the theatrical experience of it all. And I do think, I agree with you, like something like Star Wars, people will find it and it'll touch them in a meaningful way no matter what. But I think there is something about the church destination of it all, watching it with other people in a communal way, getting together the way you guys camped out. Also, this thing of watching it when it's available, not at your own time, which I think all adds up to it. And because, yes, of course, you want to go and watch the next one when it comes out, and you will if it came out on Netflix. But I think the whole act of going to it with a bunch of people sort of adds to it, because you want to relive that experience or you want to top it. Like you camped out the first time, maybe the second time you do something else, you eat it, with the people that you saw it with. So, and I do think these two things are linked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the future, I guess it'll just be, will humans, for lack of a better word, will people find some other way other than film to get that communal experience and sort of replace the need for then theaters to give that? And theaters are then become just as prolific or prevalent as like opera houses. Yeah, operas still exist, and that was an art form that was very popular a couple hundred years ago. There are people that still love it and go to it, but it's not driving the same mass appeal or the same number of audience or dollars in that way. And, maybe that'll just be what film transitions into, where I will never stop going to theaters, whether it's old movies to see again or new movies. Like, I will go to theaters, but I'll supplement that with Knives Out, being like, yeah, I can see this in theater. I don't really feel like it. I heard it's good. Okay, great. And then I'll catch it on streaming, which I did, and really enjoyed the film. Yeah. So I think it's just going to become a hybrid of that, is my prediction, but who knows?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, great. So what were some of the films that didn't make the list that are still memorable theatrical experiences for you?
Avengers Endgame, Parasite, Lady Bird, Cold War, and Titanic. And Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh, okay. Man, Titanic. Now I feel like I'm going to add that to my list. That I didn't even think about that for me. So I'm going to start with Titanic. And then the other ones that I had thought of, Phantom Menace, which is the first Star Wars, Tenet, which was when the two of us rented that theater to see it during the pandemic. That was pretty cool. Endgame, definitely. Batman Begins, and Black Widow. And I'm embarrassed I didn't remember Titanic myself, but thanks for bringing that up. That's a special movie for me. So
I know exactly. Well, that's our episode. I hope you guys all enjoyed listening to our conversation about movies at the movies. And if you so like what we're doing here, we'd really appreciate your support. Please rate us and subscribe and review us as well. And we can be found at any of the major podcasting platforms, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Until next time, bye.